Hey there, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and this channel is all about teaching tips for college instructors, as well as, more recently, online teaching tips and EdTech tutorials. So if any of that interests you, go ahead and subscribe below if you haven't already. But today I'm talking about my current plans for how to make this hybrid teaching situation work, when I start for both my students and for myself. And so my next video on Friday will be more about strengthening your online instructor presence if you're teaching fully online. But currently I'm teaching half the class in person while the other half simultaneously is on Zoom. And so I have some ideas of how to make sure that works, well for all of us. I'm really curious to know if you're doing hybrid as well or some kind of other situation. So do let me know in the comments below how you'll be teaching in this fall, at least to begin with in the semester. But here, the first thing that I'm planning on doing is actually being done before the semester begins, and that's asking how many of my students plan on taking the course fully remotely. Because even though we're doing hybrid, the students have the chance to say, I want to take it fully online, or I need to take it fully online. And so I want to know, okay, of my 29 students in one course, and I think 25 in the other, how many of them are actually never going to be there in person? So I can get a good sense of how many students I will have at an individual time, because I can only have half the class at once max, right? Because of the separation of 6 feet. So my first thing is actually just asking who's going fully remote, so I have a real sense of who will be in my classroom physically and how many will be constantly on Zoom. And then speaking of Zoom, my next few elements of this video have to do with that. So for first and foremost, I'm going to make sure that my Zoom links for my students are very easy to find. So I have a Zoom link for the actual class period and then a Zoom link for my office hours. And so I'm going to make sure that that's at the very top of my modules page so students can find them very easily when class begins, as well as when they want to speak to me during my office hours, which will be fully online this semester. Even with the links easy to find, I want to make sure I get to class around 10 minutes early, because there's 10 minutes in between courses, so that I can set up as soon as possible Zoom on the computer to make sure there's no tech difficulties, as well as letting students into the room if they happen to come across early. Because one thing I'm definitely doing is using the waiting room feature so that, Zoom bombing is less likely to happen, because I'm letting them in manually as class begins, and so students do have to use their actual name as their Zoom name, so I know to let them into the class. And so getting there a bit early could be helpful for this, though there is the possibility as well, because maybe you or I don't have much time. And so I'm going to have basically a list of writing prompts ready. I'm teaching writing, so that if the class period starts and I still have to finish setting up or there's a tech issue, I can have students in the class be doing a writing prompt, right, to start off with until I have everything figured out and ready for students to, get started on. Likewise, maybe there's no tech issue, but since I'll be screen sharing with my students, constantly because of the ones that are at home, I might not have everything set up already when the class period begins, so then I can give everybody, both the ones in class and on Zoom, a writing prompt to work on while I'm getting the actual screen ready with my Pear Deck or with my other slides or websites, whatever the case may be. And so once that's all set up, they'll finish their writing prompt, we'll discuss their answers for a bit, and then I can screen share without having to feel like, okay, just wait a few minutes while I get ready, right? I might not be able to get there early, so I can just have a prompt ready for them to do. So the first 5 to 10 minutes are me setting up for screen sharing, but they're still doing something productive with their time. And then my final Zoom element before I move on to other things that I'm doing is during the first class period, I'm going to tell all students, the ones in person and on Zoom, that if they're willing, those of them who really project and speak very loudly, if they're comfortable with it, I would love them to be in the back to the left, furthest away from my podium, because the mic is attached to the podium. So the student who's all the way catty corner from me, it's going to be hard to hear if they're very soft-spoken, right? And so I want to make sure the projectors, if they're okay with being in the back of the room and being on that side, go ahead, next class period, and start off over there rather than where you are currently. And the ones who aren't there yet, but they're going to have their first class period in person on Thursday, they'll know to come in, and if they're comfortable with it, go ahead and move to the seat that they feel would best, help them, so that when they speak, I don't have to constantly repeat what they're saying to the ones on Zoom who can't really hear unless they're loud enough to be heard with my mic on the podium. So I'm not sure if you're willing to do this, but I think it can just be, again, they're college students. So I'm like, you can sit wherever the hell you want, but if you're willing, next class period, maybe you can move around to where you know that you will be heard by the students on Zoom. Because obviously it benefits you when you're in person, but also when you're on Zoom, because you want to make sure that you can hear them as well. So that's my last, little tidbit for Zoom. Currently, we'll see how any of these change as the semester actually begins. And if you have any of your own, Zoom hacks, let me know as well. I'd love to have them, before the semester begins. My next tip has nothing to do with synchronous learning. It's actually about late work. And so I always accept late work, but usually there's like penalties, like half a letter grade for every day it's late or whatever the case may be. But I'm going to do a different accommodation this time that I learned from one of my fellow teachers when I did like an online learning webinar. And so she talked about time banking. And I felt this idea would work really well with students, especially this semester where you have no idea what's going on in their lives. And so the idea here is you give the students a time bank, a bank account. And in my case, I'm going to do 48 hours. And so students know that, let's say a major assignment is due, Friday at 5 p.m., which I never do. I actually do 11:59 p.m. But anyways, it's due Friday at 5 p.m. And maybe they just needed a quick half hour or a quick 2 hours in order to finish it to be really strong. They can just take that time out of their time bank. And so instead of turning in at 5, they turn in at 7. Now their time bank has 46 hours left. And so they won't be penalized for that late 2 hours because they have, time in their bank. Now maybe the second, major assignment, things happen at home, things happen in their life, they just get behind. They need a full extra day before they turn it in. So again, those 24 hours are deducted from their time bank. And so they have this bank account to use throughout the whole semester for major assignments. And once that finishes, let's say they use all 48 hours, now after that fact, the penalties will go into place. They can get exceptions if there's obviously an emergency medical reason for them to need more time. But in this case, I'm really hoping that students will take advantage of this extra time limit to say, I can actually really strengthen this with an extra 5 hours of work. And why not? Because I won't be penalized because I still have time in my time bank. So I'm going to try this out for the first time and we'll see, how it goes. I'm really interested in seeing how many students use it and, how many students end up needing extra extensions if they actually, use all of 48 hours. So we'll see how that goes. I can always let you know in a future video. As a reminder, my next video will be about strengthening instructor presence while teaching fully online. And that's on Friday if you want to subscribe to make sure you don't miss that. But my final tip here is I'm going to consider doing a themed office hour each week. And so even though my students will see me in person because we're doing the hybrid form, obviously we can't get too close to each other and I'm worried that they'll be less silent. I usually get few people come to my office hours anyways. I'm worried with them being fully online that I'll get even less students come to my office hours. And so what I'm planning on doing is, out of my office hours each week, one of them, I'll tell students, this week on this office hour, we're going to be talking about this thing that we're working on currently in class. So if you have any questions or you've been wondering or you want feedback about this particular thing, just so you know, anybody's invited to show up to this office hour and talk about it. Because I'll be on there and I'll be ready to have a few pieces of advice for you if you feel you need it. And so just come on by and you can hear my little spiel and then I'll have a Q&A session after I have my little spiel. And so obviously this is extra work on my part, but I really want to make sure, this is my first time in this university teaching. It's a Hispanic serving institution, which I love because I'm also Hispanic. And so I want to make sure that I'm there for my students. And I think that can hopefully get students more invested in like, oh, I actually have a question and she was pretty cool in her office hour last time, the theme one that I went to and I listened in on. Why don't I actually go to her regular office hour and ask my question, right? So I'm hoping to take away the anxiety of attending an office hour by having themed ones, at least occasionally, but potentially up to once a week. If you're going hybrid, I hope these were helpful to you. Again, if you have any of your own tips, I would love to hear them in the comments below because this is my first time teaching in this form, so I'm always invested in learning more from those who have more experience. I'll see you next time with a new video.